My name is Rosie Lerner, and I'm in the Department of Horticulture and Landscape Architecture, but I'm here by way of representing the Diversity Action Team in Agriculture that is sponsoring this brown bag seminar featuring Dr. Kip Williams from the Department of Psychological Sciences, I do believe. So would just ask everybody to please, first of all, mute your telephones and other devices. I just remember to turn my iPad down because sometimes it gets the relay, so if you would mute those as well. And Dr. Williams is happy to entertain your questions during the program. If you have such a question, you might want to raise your hand so to get Kip's attention. And then if you're asking a question, press the button on your little microphones here. Surely someone knows how to do this besides me. Oh, it's on the other side. Oh, and you have to hold it down while you're asking. That's right, I forgot about that. They've changed these in this room. So if you're gonna ask a question, by the way, we're recording this event. So that's why we want you to use the microphone to ask your question so that we can capture what you are asking so that the answer makes sense, okay? All right, I see high noon on the clock here, and my mentor in my early extension career said this program is for them that are here, not them that ain't. So we're going. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kip Williams. And some of you that are in extension may have seen the Reject documentary film as part of our annual conference a few years ago. We got an early screening of that. And Dr. Williams' research is featured as part of that documentary. And of course, he's got many, many years of experience behind that with his research on ostracism. And of course, his talk today is on the psychological consequences of being ignored and excluded. He comes to us with many great credentials, including but not limited to having his PhD in social psychology from The Ohio State University. I share that alma mater. And he was also at University of Washington in Seattle. He was on the faculties at Macquarie University, right? And University of South Wales, both in Sydney. And he has many, many years of publications and editing in many of the journals. I won't take up his time to list them all, but he has published over 140 articles and chapters and is the recipient of many, many awards. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Kip Williams, and let's give him a round of applause for sharing his time with us.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to dim the light so that you can see what's more important, the slides rather than me. And as Rosie suggests, if you do have a question during my talk, clarification or something, please feel free to ask, and I'll be happy to answer. So I'm going to be talking about, I guess it's going on 22 years of sustained research on this topic. And going through some of the work that we've done and some of the more recent findings that we've discovered. I first became interested in this topic when I was a graduate student at Ohio State, and I watched a documentary about a young cadet at West Point who did not put his pencil down when the instructor said pencils down during an exam. He finished a few words of a sentence. That was a violation of the honor code at West Point. The typical thing for him to do would be to basically leave the academy at that point, but he decided to stay on, and so they instituted the unwritten policy of silencing on him, meaning that when he went back to his dorm, his roommate had already moved out. When he would walk down the hallway, all of his colleagues, all of the other cadets would look the other way, would not look at him. They wouldn't talk to him ever. When he went to the cafeteria to eat and he got his tray and sat down at a table full of cadets, they would all stand up and leave and move to another table. This silencing procedure is something that they've used for over 100 years, and typically it drums out cadets they don't want within a week. It's extremely painful. When I watched it, I was cringing and thinking this is really a very strong social psychological phenomenon that, to my knowledge, had not really been given much attention in my field. And so at that point, I sort of vowed to study it at some point later in my career because I was doing something else at the time. Along the way, I read an autobiography by General Benjamin O. Davis, who was a graduate of West Point in 1936. He was silenced from the moment he arrived. Anybody guess what he did wrong? Yes, he was an African American, and at that point they didn't want any African Americans at West Point, so they silenced him. He never was talked to by any of his cadets or looked at or eaten with the entire time he was there. Obviously, he and James were sort of the exception to the rules. Most of the people who endured that would leave right away, but they stuck it out, and for Davis, he did quite well, becoming a general. So that was my impetus for being interested in it, and I sort of sustained an interest for a long time without actually doing anything, just thinking about it. One of the things I found along the way was a quote from someone who sometimes referred to as the father of psychology, William James. He was talking about different types of selves that there are, and one of them is the self, the social self, which is sort of we figure out who we are by how other people respond to us. And he wrote in that chapter, if no one turned around when we entered, answered when we spoke, or minded what we did, but if every person we met cut us dead and acted as if we were non-existing things, a kind of rage and impotent despair would ere long well up in us, from which the cruelest bodily tortures would be a relief. For these would make us feel that, however bad might be our plight, we had not sunk to such a depth as to be unworthy of attention at all. So, paraphrasing, this is sort of like saying it's worse to be invisible and to be ignored and excluded than it is to be bullied or harassed. Because at least then you know that they know you exist. Ostracism, as I define it, is being ignored and excluded. Other words that conjure up this idea: to shun, to exile, to send to Coventry, that's an English and Australian phrase, to freeze out, giving somebody the cold shoulder. In the Amish community, Meidung, avoidance, worst possible punishment, which is basically the same as silencing for someone who doesn't follow the norms. At an interpersonal level, the silent treatment. How many in here have ever gotten the silent treatment from somebody you care about? Okay. Now be honest. How many in here have ever given the silent treatment to somebody you care about? Okay. So this is a phenomenon that we have experienced both sides of. It's not like there's ostracizers and there's ostracized. Some people endure those more than others or do those more than others, but most of us have experienced both sides of it. There's a lot of different phrases internationally, some of which I really like and that are quite evocative. In Germany, they say "wie Luft behandeln," which means to look at somebody as though they are air. In the Netherlands, they say "doodschweigen," which means to silence someone to death. In Japan, they say "mokusatsu," which means to kill with silence. In China, "dantatoming" means to treat someone as though they are transparent. I've recently found out that there might be some better phrases that I should use instead of that. Ostracism is ubiquitous. When I first became interested in it, I guess I thought probably it was mostly a human thing, but it isn't. Anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists, ethologists who study animals in their natural habitat, they always remark on the existence of ostracism among all social animals. So Jane Goodall's work and others show that animals, lions, wolves, primates, buffaloes, coyotes, dogs, even bees ostracize members of their group, usually members of their group who are somehow burdensome or acting erratically or somehow a threat to the group. This is something that children do seemingly without instruction with their friends on the playground, to their parents. Governments do it either formally or informally. Tribes around the world use it. It's typically their most severe form of punishment rather than capital punishment. And whatever it's called is often translated into the word social death. Institutions use it, and religious institutions employ excommunication and disfellowship. In the military, we've mentioned silencing. In education and at home, we give time out as a punishment, as a way to stop some kind of behavior that's unwanted. That's a short-term period of ostracism. Prisons themselves are marginalized from the community, and even within prisons, you have the silent treatment, the solitary confinement, which is a more extreme version. And as I said, dyads employ silent treatment. Over 70% of Americans report, as you did, having gotten it and given it, the silent treatment. In the animal kingdom, anthropologists argue that the ubiquity of something suggests that it's functional or adaptive, and that ostracism has serves that function of strengthening the groups. So groups who did not ostracize erratic or threatening burdensome members of their groups often themselves did not survive, their genes did not perpetuate. Those that did ostracize members of their group, their genes survived, and so it became part of their genetic plan to ostracize when they are confronted by a burdensome or erratic or member who threatens the survival of their group. By doing so, it strengthens their group, either by just getting rid of that member of the group. And by the way, when they do that, that member of the group usually dies within a week. So it's not a euphemism to say social death. Or if the animal can sort of correct its behavior and stop behaving erratically or burdensome, then it can rejoin the group, and the group again is stronger. My research suggests that while it's adaptive maybe to use it, and especially in our social origins, it is also adaptive, functionally adaptive for us as individuals to perceive it, to detect it, and to detect it as soon as it's happening, because at that point we can maybe do something about it. We can correct our behaviors, we can go to another group, we can do something before it's too late, before it becomes social death for us. And so I argue that we have, what has evolved is an ostracism detection system that basically warns us at the first hint of being ignored and excluded. And that figures into the research that we do in the model that I'll present in just a moment. So I don't know if I can go so far as to say it's hardwired in us, but it certainly seems as though it is. I use a multi-method approach. I'm a social psychologist, meaning roughly that I am interested in how people affect people. I'm an experimental social psychologist, which means I do experiments. I randomly assign half my people to be included and half the people to be ostracized, often in a lab, sometimes in the field. But I do use other methods as well that are more qualitative: interviews, diaries, surveys, and things of that sort, role plays as well. I'll be mostly focusing on my experimental work today. I'm guided by my need-threat model of ostracism, which basically says that as soon as you are exposed to being ignored and excluded, you experience pain. This is the alarm. This is that early ostracism detection in action, that we experience pain. And I'm not saying pain like in a metaphorical, as a metaphor, but actually our brain registers it as pain. We also have 4 fundamental needs that are threatened: the need to belong, the need to have a reasonably high self-esteem, a need to feel that you have control over your environment and your social environment, and the need to feel that your existence is meaningful, that you are acknowledged as existing, and there's some purpose. We also find that there are emotional reactions often to ostracism that accompany it. There's kind of a myriad of them. So there's anger and sadness and shame and feelings of uncertainty, among others. After, I should add that on this, in our research, we've done now hundreds of studies, not only in my lab, but other people across the world. And there is remarkable convergence on all of these effects, despite things you might think are important. You might think, well, some people are more bothered by it than others, or some people would be more resilient to it than others. And certainly those things are true, but the initial reaction that we see in almost everybody, from 7 years old to over 90, all cultures that we've studied, ethnicities, genders, show these effects. Individual differences do make a difference in a moment, but not initially so much. So the next stage, after this immediate pain that's signaled, that basically warns the person, hey, you better pay attention to this is important, this is potentially life-threatening, at least ages ago, is the reflective stage. And in the reflective stage, the individual tries to make sense of what's going on, why is this happening, to determine whether it's important or not, or something they can easily dismiss, or maybe something they incorrectly perceived, and then they try to cope with it. They try to recover from it and cope with it. And what we find is that the coping methods that are emotional and cognitive and behavioral all seem to be aimed at fortifying one or more of the threatened needs. So to fortify a sense of belonging and to fortify a sense of self-esteem, we try to fit in more. We become more pliable, more agreeable, maybe too agreeable, too pliable, that we start to conform to people that we don't even agree with, or go along to get along in a way that sort of removes our true sense of self from what we're doing. In order to fortify a sense of control and meaningful existence, we might try to provoke people's attention and to control them, often in the form of aggression or lashing out. And then sometimes when people are ostracized, we find that they might want to control their situation and cope by removing themselves from further opportunities to be rejected and ostracized. And so paradoxically, by being ostracized by a group, they go into hiding and seek solitude and don't allow themselves further rejection. So as you can see, none of these are terrifically functional responses, although trying to fit in does get you back into the group and does not perpetuate further ostracism. The other two, they do perpetuate further ostracism. In the third stage, thankfully, most people don't have to even enter this third stage, but in our interviews with people, we've had individuals who have been ostracized for months and years and decades at work, in their church, with their family, at school. And for these individuals, the resources necessary to fortify these threatened needs become depleted over time. And rather than trying to cope by doing things to get themselves to belong or to take control over the situation or to provoke attention, they just basically give up. And so you see with these people, and we get this mostly from interviews, but recently from some nice research that Paolo Riva has done in Italy, that they score particularly high in alienation, depression, helplessness, and worthlessness. In our interviews, many of the individuals that endured long-term ostracism engaged in suicidal ideation, and many attempted suicide as well. Just as an example of somebody we interviewed, one woman did something that ticked her husband off in their 20s or so, and he stopped talking to her. He wouldn't look at her. He wouldn't eat at the same table with her, and this continued for 40 years. For 40 years. Now you might say, why would anybody stay with somebody for 40 years that was doing that? And it's the same reason why people stay in an abusive relationship that's physically abusive or psychologically abusive, is that they become to think they're worthless, like they don't have other alternatives. And she said, at least I had a roof over my head. And so by the time we did the interview, he was dead. but she was still sort of in the dark as to why he did it, and she was still feeling pretty worthless and unmotivated. In our diary studies, where we ask people to write down any instance where they feel ignored and excluded, and it could even be for the shortest period of time, even by somebody that's not that important to them, we find that on average people report 1 episode a day. And you might think that's a lot. I actually think that's an underrepresentation of how often it happens. But if you're paying particular attention, you're talking to somebody and then they suddenly look over your shoulder and move off to somewhere else, or somebody doesn't acknowledge your existence when you're really close to them, it happens. Whether or not it says we should categorize that as ostracism compared to the more extreme examples I'll try to get to a little bit later, I argue that they should belong in the same category. They might not have the same long-lasting effects, but they do have the same short-term effects. Yeah, in our diary study, the worst example is one young man, during the 2-week study, he came out to his father and told his father that he was gay, and his father turned to him and said, "You are no longer my son, you are dead to me." So we had a full range from very trivial to extremely important examples of ostracism. When I started to think about how to study this ostracism as an experimental psychologist, social psychologist, I was sort of not clear how best to do it in a lab. And something actually happened to me that gave me the idea. And so in a moment when I tell you what I do, if I didn't tell you this, you'd say, this is so unrealistic. This never happens. Well, it actually did happen to me, and that's how it became a lab paradigm. So this is an excerpt from that documentary. I was at a park with my dog, minding my own business, and suddenly a Frisbee kind of rolled up onto my lap, and I saw it. I turned around, saw 2 guys waiting for it, so I stood up and threw it back. I was going to go sit back down again, but to my surprise, they threw it to me. So I joined them. I approached, and we had a triangle, and we were throwing the Frisbee around. 4 minutes, we started throwing it to each other, and of course, we're guys, so we don't need to talk to each other or ask each other our names or anything. We just start playing. And then after about 4 minutes, they just stopped throwing it to me. And they just started throwing it to each other. And at first, I'm thinking they're going to tool around with me a little bit, and I'm maybe smiling. And then I realized it's just never going to get to me again. And I felt terrible. And I couldn't believe how amazingly awful I felt for such a silly thing. And I kind of moped back to my dog and, reattached myself and made friends with my dog. You can tell that when I'm remembering the story, I get choked up. But one of the nice things about being an experimental social psychologist that was interested in ostracism was I was able to turn that episode into something positive for me. And it was within seconds, I thought, I can do this in the lab. It's really simple. It's relatively context-free. It happened very quickly. And I thought, this is something that I can use myself to test what are the effects of ostracism on individuals in a lab setting. I want to say up front that when we do research in a lab, we go through ethics committees, and it is necessary for us to, while we're trying to get effects, to not make them too strong or too damaging or too traumatizing. So we do what we do for just a couple of minutes, and of course we debrief them at the end. But I think it's fair to say that what we find in the lab is an underestimate of how it would feel to be ostracized in the real world by people that you know and care about. The initial attempt to take this into the lab was the ball tossing paradigm. 3 people would show up at a time for an experiment. I'm playing the role of the actual participant. The other 2 people there are confederates, people who are working for the experimenter and have a script to follow. The experimenter tells the 3 people, "Thank you for coming. Please sign these consent forms after you read them." And then just wait quietly for 5 minutes as I set up the experiment, and I'll come back to get you in about 5 minutes. Experimenter leaves. There's a box in the room that says, "Child Toy Experiment, please leave in room." One of the confederates glances in the box, rummages around, finds a ball, looks at the other two subjects, and smiles and starts to toss it. Now, we didn't know whether people would really engage in that. It turns out we've run well over 1,000 people in this particular paradigm. Every single person, male, female, whatever, catches the ball and throws it. Okay, so they start throwing the ball around, sometimes being kind of throwing it off the wall or having sort of fun doing whatever. And for half of the people, they are included equally for about 4 or 5 minutes. But for the other half of the people, because of a signal that the experimenter gave as a consequence of a random assignment, the Confederates throw it to the individual in the middle for a couple times and then stop throwing it to them completely for the remaining 4 minutes. And then we observed their behavior. We gave them questionnaires afterwards to see how they felt, and other studies look at various behaviors that they engage in afterwards to see what is that effect of being ignored and excluded just for a short period of time. Here's a video of a young woman who's in this study. She's a little unusual in that she's talkative at the beginning, and she's telling them about having been in a psych class lecture and learning about Milgram's research on obedience and how people are deceived in research, which is kind of ironic. She's very gregarious, very talkative, smiling a lot. This is just 2 minutes into it, after it wasn't thrown to her. You can see that she's making far less eye contact to them. She's looking down. She's looking distressed. If we showed the video at the very end, she's simply slumped in her seat looking down. Almost every participant that we studied did the same thing. Nobody tries to intercept the ball. Nobody says, hey, what's going on here? Everybody first maybe engages it a little bit and looks around, but eventually they just slump in their seat and look down at the floor. We find that when we give them a questionnaire afterwards, there's a significant drop in the 4 fundamental needs, satisfaction of those fundamental needs. There's higher levels of anger and sadness. That was a pretty difficult method for us to use for a couple reasons. It just was hard to watch for me, and it seemed like a little bit too long, but also it had effects on the 2 Confederates. They were nice young men at the beginning. After 2 months, they turned into sort of sadistic monsters. And they only liked it when they were ostracizing the person, and they got up for it, and they laughed, and it was not a good thing. So I thought maybe I need to scale this down a little bit and do something that's even maybe less impactful than that, and that doesn't involve assistants that are working as Confederates. So we developed Christopher Chung and Wilma Choi at the University of New South Wales, and I developed Cyberball. In this game, you're in a room by yourself. You're told that the experiment is interested in the effects of mental visualization on subsequent task performance. So like if you visualize making a free throw, does that make you be better at making a free throw? We told them that a way to engage a person or give them practice at mental visualization was to play this game called Cyberball. They're the person at the bottom, and when the ball is thrown to them by one of the 2 other participants who are in the same study but in different rooms, then their task is to click one of the 2 people and throw the ball to them. But the most important thing is that we said, what we want you to do here is, we don't care who gets the ball and who's throwing it. We want you to mentally visualize, who are these people? What are they like? Where are you throwing it, indoors or outdoors? If outdoors, what's the geography like? What's the temperature? Mainly so that they don't think that not getting the ball is related to failing the experiment, that the experiment is all about mental visualization. If they were randomly assigned to the ostracism condition, then the game looked like this. By the way, the word ostracism and inclusion are not on the screen. But they get the ball once at the beginning, maybe twice, and then they never get it again. And we just do this for 2 minutes. Now, my colleagues at the time said, this is stupid. You're wasting your time. You're wasting your students' time. This will never work. And you need to really think of another line of research to do. And so this scared me. But it turns out they were wrong. And it turns out that this was almost as powerful as the face-to-face ball tossing paradigm. We have effect sizes in psychology that usually are around 0.3. The effect size for getting need, threat, and affect, mood effects is around 1.42 in this paradigm. So it's very powerful. One way to sort of show that, people were brought into a lab and trained to dial a dial saying how happy or sad they were, and they'd use their non-preferred hand. And they did this for 20 minutes, so they got very good at doing it. And then they played cyberball, and we told them simply to continue the dialing as they were playing it. That vertical line on the graph is when the ball will stop being thrown to the yellow line people. And you can see it takes about 20 seconds for them to kind of realize they're not getting the ball again. But once they realize they're not getting the ball again, then there's a severe decline in positive affect to heading towards negative affect or negative emotions. And this is a drop from about 6.5 to 3.5. Usually in our field, we're pretty happy to see a drop from 6.5 to 5.5. So this is a kind of a large effect. Here's a young woman, a couple women that were interviewed following playing cyberball. This was a documentary that was done by the BBC where they where they replicated a study that we did where people were playing cyberball while laying down reclining in a fMRI scanner. The cover story there is we're interested in what the effects of mental visualization are on your brain, but what we're interested in, what are the effects of ostracism on your brain? What is your brain doing when you're being ignored and excluded? Here's a couple of participants who were interviewed following that experiment.
Okay, that I'm part of an experiment, and this is supposed to teach me something, but really, how I feel is pissed off.
Geraldine had a similar reaction.
I felt a little lost because we had all gone into this on the same level. And here they were developing their own thing, and I was just left aside.
I thought, okay, this is a joke, or they've got something against me, or I'm throwing too hard, or they don't like the way I play.
So you can see that you think a lot when it's not happening to you. That's part of the coping process kicking in. And the thoughts are often not terribly rational. I didn't throw it very well. Well, there's no way not to throw it well. You just click one person or the other. But their attributions, their thoughts are all over the place. Something about them, something about me, and they're just sort of entertaining a large number of possibilities. In that study that they replicated and what we did originally with Naomi Eisenberger and Matt Lieberman is that we found that the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex was activated. This is on the left side, that orange-yellow spot, as soon as they detected not getting the ball being thrown to them. This is a region of the brain that detects pain, among other things, and the more that was activated, the more distress they reported after the experiment that they were experiencing. On the right ventral prefrontal cortex was then activated. This is the more, so the anterior cingulate cortex is the more primitive part of the brain. Detecting pain is a very fundamental reaction to survival. In the cerebral cortex, the more evolved part of the brain, it has to do with coping, making sense, dealing with it. The more that was activated in participants, the less distress they reported. And there have been 35, 40 studies that have come out since replicating this effect. Sometimes different regions of the brain that are also involved in reactions to pain are activated. Here's a young man who's playing cyberball. He is being videotaped, but he doesn't realize it at the time. He does now, and he's giving me permission to use it. The ball is stopped being thrown to him right now, and his first reaction is that he thinks it's kind of funny. He thinks they're teasing him. Probably if I stopped the study right there and said, would you like to go out with these guys for a beer, he'd say yes. Okay, but there's a point where it kind of becomes clear to him that he's not going to get that ball thrown to him again. And he shifts, his emotional reaction shifts. He changes his hat for some reason. This signals an emotion shift for him. And he gets angry. And I'm not an expert on nonverbal behavior, but even I know when somebody is angry. So he's sort of stewing in his anger at this point, And, and of course, afterwards, people who do this report lower levels of belonging, control, self-esteem, and meaningful existence. But just a minute and a half into it, he'll shift his hat one more time. And I think at this point, he shows some signs of sadness and resignation if you watch his mouth. It seems like not anger anymore, but kind of giving up and sad. And so this surprised me. Frankly, when I came up with Cyberball and people were by themselves in a little room playing, I didn't think you'd see anything, because often we think of emotions as communication to other people, and if there are no other people there, then why bother going through them? But we see lots of emotional reactions, people throwing their mouse, going way back on the chair, disengaging, and it's sort of surprised me at how animated people are when they're by themselves. When we ask people to try to characterize the psychological closeness they felt with the other two people afterwards, we had them move balls around to sort of symbolize how close they felt to the others. So they're player 2, the other two players are player 1 and 3, and when asked to move the balls to sort of indicate the psychological closeness, in the inclusion condition, there's a slight tendency for there to be some perceived closeness, but not so much that it's overlapping, just a bit more close. So as one of my students says, playing Cyberball and being included is not a kumbaya experience. It's just a mildly bonding experience. Interestingly, when people are ostracized, two things happen. They perceive a much greater psychological closeness between the other two players than occurs in the inclusion condition, and then they themselves feel further apart from them. So they actually see an overlap in terms of the psychological closeness of the other people. We've done a number of experiments with Cyberball. Initially, we were worried we wouldn't get anything at all. Turns out we were wrong. Then we started pushing the envelope. Well, how minimal can we make this? How do we get rid of this effect? So in one case, we simply told participants the truth that they were playing with a computer that had been programmed to do what it did. What surprised us is that people felt just as bad. Their self-esteem dropped as much, belonging, control, meaningful existence, sadness, all of the same thing that when we convinced them that they were playing with other people. This is this automatic effect that I was arguing about, that we're not even sort of, it bypasses cognition. They see ignoring and excluding, and it automatically clicks in the pain, and then they make sense of it afterwards. So it's an adaptive kind of hardwired effect. We convinced, one of my students said, well, when they play Cyberball in the lab, they think they're playing with other participants, and they think other participants are sort of similar to them. They're other college students. So that might say that people don't like to be ostracized when they're among friends or similar others, but maybe it wouldn't bother somebody to be ostracized by someone that was very different from them or people that they actually despise. So at the time in Australia, the KKK of Australia was rearing its ugly head. We took advantage of that. We made an elaborate ruse in the experiment where we had bumper stickers and posters all over the lab of various very diverse groups in political ideology, including the KKK of Australia. We then convinced participants that they were playing either with members who were similar to them ideologically, or in the rival group ideologically, or this despised group, the KKK of Australia. And we expected that people would care more about being ostracized by their in-group, less by the rival out-group, and maybe not at all by the despised out-group. But we didn't find that. We found just as strong effects for all three groups. That's how much it bothered them just as much to be ostracized by the KKK of Australia. We've since replicated this at Howard University here in the United States, and these students are the targets of the KKK, and we found the same thing for them. It bothered them just as much to be ostracized by two members of the KKK as by Democrats or Republicans. Behavioral economists think that everything's about money, and that the ball basically represents money, and so when you're not getting the ball, it's like not getting money. And so they said if you just turn the payoff scheme around so that the ball represented taking away money, you'd wipe out this effect. That's all it is. And so we did that, and we said you have this was done in Netherlands, you have €5. Right now, when you're going to play this game, you're going to mentally visualize. When the ball is thrown to you, though, 50 cents is taken away from you. And so during a game, if they're included, they lose all their money. If they're ostracized, they keep almost all their money, and the other two players lose their money. It bothered them just as much. We get the same effects. We then convinced some. We made the ball into a little bomb with a fuse. We said, you're going to play this game. It's going to blow up at some point. Your character will die. You won't be able to continue in the experiment and play in other games. And so the bomb is being passed around. And we compared that to another condition where the ball is being tossed around. And it bothered them just as much to be ostracized by not getting the bomb thrown to them as not getting the ball. It's like your friends saying, we're going to go play Russian roulette, but you're not invited. For a moment, you feel bad. Just a moment, just a moment. What's wrong with me? How come I can't go? Now, after a couple minutes, maybe less, you're kind of probably thinking, I don't want to do that. But it bothers you to be ostracized, even for things that are rationally good to be ostracized from. Now, during the reflective stage, when we try to make sense of things and try to cope, then we see different effects emerging and individual differences occurring. So we see a lot of this go along to get along effect where people become excessively socially susceptible, pliable, spineless, however you want to put it. They're more likely to after 2 minutes of cyberball ostracism, they're more likely to conform to a new group who is giving unanimous but incorrect answers to a question that is very simple to answer and that people get 100% right when they're by themselves. They're more likely to comply with somebody asking them for money, not only to give money, but to give more money. They're more likely to obey a command to go out and do something that's unpleasant and effortful if they've been ostracized than if they're included. They're more likely to work harder on a collective task where their contributions are pooled with everybody else. Typically, when you work on a task when your contributions are pooled with other people, you engage in social loafing. You don't try as hard. When you've been ostracized, you actually try harder than when you're working alone on the task. When you're interviewed by somebody who happens to be scratching their face a lot or wiggling their foot a lot, if you've been ostracized, you're more likely to scratch your face and wiggle your foot while you're talking to them. This is non-conscious mimicry. It's something that we do to be liked and to fit in. But as I said earlier, other effects occur. And so under certain conditions, especially when the chance of reuniting with a new group are cut off and you want to somehow fortify some needs, you're forced to want to take control and to be provocative. And so we see instances of lashing out and aggression following ostracism, rejection, and social exclusion. Here's Rudolph sitting comfortably on his chair reading a book, and it says all of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. Now they're all mounted on his wall. Research has found that under certain circumstances, ostracized people are more likely to physically hurt another person by giving them shock, delivering loud noise, forcing them to eat hot sauce, derogating another person's performance, engaging in other antisocial behaviors like cheating on a test. Unfortunately, we see this too often in the real world. I'm not going to read all of these. You can just sort of select one as I'm talking. But there continues to be instances of school shooters, workplace shooters, in which people appear to have been rejected or ignored or ostracized or marginalized. And they're not trying to get people to like them anymore. They're trying to be noticed. They're trying to provoke and say, look at me, I'm an important person. I'll just pick one. On the right, he was a school shooter in Oregon. He had been a follower of the blog of another shooter in California, and he wrote, I have noticed that so many people like him, the other blog writer, are all alone and unknown, yet when they spill a little blood, the whole world knows who they are. A man who is known by no one is now known by everyone. His face splashed across every screen, his name across the lips of every person on the planet, all in the course of one day. Seems the more people you kill, the more you're in the limelight. So these people aren't really trying to be liked or get involved in a group anymore. They just want to be noticed. They just want to be acknowledged, and they take the easiest way to get worldwide attention is through violence. Ostracism, in just a couple of minutes, has effects on people's motivation. They're less able to engage in self-regulation, meaning that they're more likely to binge eat food that's not good for them or to not eat something that's healthy for them. It reduces their feelings of self-efficacy. They don't think they're as effective at doing tasks afterwards. It increases their intention to engage in risky sex and drug use. These were at-risk juveniles in the Washington, D.C. area who played cyberball. It increases attraction to extreme, even antisocial groups. And here we even find on campus, Andy Hales has done research among one of my PhD students where he's found that just 2 minutes of ostracism makes Purdue students say that they're more interested in perhaps joining a gang, which is like, what, a gang of engineers? I don't know what that means. But we're finding some other examples as well. We see cognitive effects. Ostracism makes us feel that life is more meaningless on a life is meaningless scale. And that's kind of amazing to me, because that's supposed to be sort of a worldview that is stable. And yet 2 minutes of playing cyberball makes you think that life is a little bit more meaningless because you're not getting an imaginary ball from two people that you've never seen. It interferes with complex problem solving, yet it sharpens the focus and ability to pick up on subtle social cues. People who have been ostracized are better able to detect genuine rather than non-authentic smiles. They're more likely to notice incongruent emotional displays where someone's smiling but saying something negative or frowning and saying something positive. And they're more likely to remember social information than if they'd been included. Not all information, just social information. So they seem to really be focusing on people after they are ostracized. It has physiological effects. It activates the pain regions in the brain, as I've mentioned. It increases stress hormones like cortisol. It causes the heart to skip a beat. And it makes people colder. It makes people feel colder. They think that the room is more cold or that they would prefer hot drinks after hot food after being ostracized. But we actually, in another study, hooked them up to a thermometer on their fingers, and after 2 minutes of cyberball, they actually were colder than if they were included, in which case they were slightly warmer. And why does that even make any sense at all? Well, when we are threatened, our blood goes from our periphery to our core. So if you're picking it up, the temperature on the periphery, that's why you're going to see that. So it's, again, these things I never anticipated would happen from this game. They do. I'll finish with some subtle and perhaps unintended instantiations of ostracism. This is something that I think you can take into your own life and think about it, because these are things that you can do to make people feel more included or not, or to at least think about what you're doing. Research, not by me but by others, has found that just having Christmas decorations makes non-Christians feel marginalized, and it threatens their fundamental needs. I'm not saying we need to stop doing it, I'm just saying this happens. And so people who are in a lab where they see some leftover Christmas decorations and they're Muslims or they're atheists or they're Jews, they actually report lower levels of self-esteem, meaningful existence, control, belonging than if that wasn't in the room. Likewise, if you're looking at a job description that says the person who we want for this job, he has to have this quality, he has to have that quality, he has to have this quality. If you're a female, you don't feel that that's aimed at you. You feel lower levels of those fundamental needs because of the use of male gendered pronouns. We tested people who were strong Christians and gave them passages from the Bible that were exclusionary or passages from the Bible that were inclusionary. And we found that for these individuals reading the exclusionary passages, it threatened their fundamental needs, and they were less likely to donate to the church or to a charitable cause. In the Department of in the electrical engineering, you'll see, and probably other buildings here on campus, you'll see lots of photographs of graduating classes. If you look at this hallway, you go halfway through it before you see a female, and then you see a sprinkling of females. So Janice Kelly and Megan McCarty and I did a study where we had an interviewer stop in front of one of the pictures and just asked a few questions about how connected you feel to your major, what your feelings of the 4 needs were, how likely you were to want to continue being a major in engineering, and we interviewed males and females, either in front of a poster with all males or with some females in it, and it reduced the feelings of connection and desire to major in females who were in front of the male-only pictures. Okay, and we do this all the time on campus. If you look at campus, there's just filled with halls of male figures, and if you're a female, how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel about the likelihood of succeeding in that? If we look at somebody as though they're air, looking over them or through them into the distance to somebody else, then we've done this on campus. And if you look over somebody's ear into the distance, so you're looking in their direction but not at them, and then followed up, somebody asked them, how connected do you feel? How socially connected do you feel at Purdue? They feel less socially connected if somebody did that than if nobody looked at them at all, or if somebody looked and smiled at them or looked at them. So that having this sense that somebody should be noticing you, should be acknowledging you, and isn't, is very disheartening. Apparently, this is the interpretation at the inauguration where Melania thought Trump was looking at her, only to discover that he was actually looking behind her at his daughter, and then her face dramatically shifted after that realization. You all use acronyms and abbreviations all the time. I get emails from you that have so many acronyms and abbreviations, I have no idea what it's about, and I throw them away, okay? The use of acronyms and abbreviations for people who aren't in the know, who are thinking about becoming a member or new members, is off-putting. It marginalizes you. It actually reduces your feelings of belonging, control, meaningful existence, and self-esteem. Stop using abbreviations and acronyms. It's not that difficult to spell it out. Okay? That's something you can actually do. I went home once, saw People magazine because my wife, subscribes to it. There was like 5 people on the cover. I didn't know any of them. I thought, God, am I out of the loop? Nicole Ione and Janice Kelly and I have done research showing that, indeed, if you show people pop icons, music, movie stars, logos that they think are famous and everybody knows, but they don't know them, it threatens their fundamental needs as well. So there's lots of stuff that has these same effects that are extremely subtle, more subtle than cyberbullying. I'm interested in studying how groups of people respond. The first topic has to do with the allure of extreme groups for people who are ostracized. Extreme, more than moderate groups are perceived to be more cohesive, more likely to make an impact, and have a more clear and certain identity. And those things are attractive to an ostracized individual. So we wonder why some individuals decide to join ISIS or something like that. This might be one of the many reasons. We're also interested in how groups who are ostracized relate to themselves, but also relate to other groups. And we suspect that it makes them into what Michelle Galfin calls a tight culture, such that ostracized groups should be less tolerant of diversity within their own group, that they become more cohesive and more goal-oriented, and that they become more hostile and distrustful and competitive with other groups. This is ongoing research that we're interested in. I'm going to finish with a positive note. A student who was in one of my colleagues' class used to try to include people in her high school who were marginalized or ostracized by others. And she said hi to this one guy that nobody would talk to, that everybody ignored. And then he was gone from school, and she wondered what happened to him. And 2 months went by, and she found a note in her locker. And it said, "Hi, Megan, thank you for saving my life. I've never fit in, and I have felt like I didn't deserve to be here anymore. I have no friends, and my family doesn't notice if I don't come home. I thought I would be better off gone, so I took as many sleeping pills as I could. Before I started to drift away, I thought of you waving to me and giving me a smile, and I called 911. Thought you should know why I was out of school. Thank you for your note." So the problem seems enormous and almost unsolvable, but it's solvable. Just you can make a difference by looking at, acknowledging, saying hi, waving to those marginalized individuals. I'd like to thank my colleagues and former colleagues and students who made this all possible, and thank you very much.
We've got several minutes available if you have any questions for Kip. Be brave, and if you have a question, please push the microphone button.
I'm being ostracized. Margot.
I couldn't help thinking about politics. Many of us are thinking about politics all of the time during your talk, and just how polarization, the polarized groups that we have today, and there does seem to be quite a bit of ostracism going on, and so I was just interested in your thoughts and the role of this polarization at a societal level here in terms of what's American and what's not American, and its possible effects.
Yeah, I mean, I went to the talk by J.D. Vance the other night, and I think that we are in our own bubbles on Facebook. We get to see what we believe in, and we engineer them to have like-minded people and like-minded ideas, and we take out people that we don't like to hear, and Facebook itself figures that out and gives us more like-minded material and less different material, and we start to ignore and exclude other big groups that exist, and to me that's really dangerous. I know that I don't like to read people's views that aren't like mine on Facebook, but I kind of purposely allow them to be in there just to remind myself that they are there and to sort of center myself. And so I think it's important to acknowledge and to interact with other people even if you don't agree with them, and hopefully to do so in a civil way, because otherwise you can get this us-them thing that is so strong and so entrenched that all it ends up in is this distrust and aggression and not solving problems. So yeah, I think it's important. Yes.
Do you think that these different levels of the optimism is driven by someone who is, let's say, outgoing or introvert or extrovert? That's what I want to.
Yeah. So the initial reaction to being aware that you're being ignored and excluded doesn't seem to be reflective of whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. But after you have time to think about it and to cope with it, it does play out differently. So extroverts are more bothered by it, but they're also more able to seek other people that they have. People from collectivistic cultures are much more easily able to bring to mind close others than people from individualistic cultures. People that have secure attachment styles are more resilient and get over it more quickly than people who are avoidant or anxiously attached. So yes, the individual differences make a big difference, but not at the initial reaction, but the subsequent reflective reaction. Yeah.
I was just thinking about Glenn Adams' work about having enemies.
Oh, can you push your button? And then you have to keep it held.
Just talking to you.
Okay. Can there be the social diffusion of ostracism such that if your brother is ostracized, you interpret it as an ostracism yourself in collectivist culture?
I would say that would be true. I would say that if your collective self, which includes very close others, if those people are ostracized, then you would definitely feel that pain and that need threat yourself as more than if somebody from a Western culture experienced that from somebody. That's an interesting idea that could be tested. We haven't looked at that. Yeah. Yes.
Is there a retaliatory ostracism? So if you're a member of a group that's ostracized someone, and then you decide I'm going to undo that and reach out to the person who is ostracized, and then you become ostracized.
Yes.
Is that a phenomenon?
This is especially true in cases of whistleblowing or in churches. So if somebody is being ostracized by the large group and you want to reach out to that person, maybe they were your best friend or something, then you end up getting ostracized along with that person because of that anger at the person for whistleblowing or whatever, and so you risk that. So I call that defensive ostracism. It's not something you want to do, it's something you sort of feel forced into doing. It probably hurts you as much to do it as it does to be done. You don't feel any power or belonging by doing it. Other studies show that if you ostracize somebody because you're angry at them, you actually get a feeling of power, and if it's with a group, you feel more belonging with that group. But defensive ostracism, I think, is bad for everybody. Yeah, and that's a very real problem. So people who want to reach out either have to do so very subtly, or they risk the wrath of the rest of the group. Yeah.
You mentioned the physiological effects. Like, for example, people feel colder or what have you. And you also mentioned that you usually, in your lab settings, you have underreported incidences, like, say, someone would say maybe once a day.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had to speculate, and I don't know if you know of any research, let's say it was the reverse, that someone probably would say they would probably experience feeling included once a week. So let's say they'd feel ostracized 50, 60 times a day. Do you think that over the long term, there'd be a plateau effect and there'd be more chronic versus acute symptoms at every instance?
This is a really important question that we've been looking into. So for people who have experienced, that are in the third stage, essentially that experience ostracism for a long period of time, that are chronically ostracized, how do they respond to any particular episode of ostracism? And there's sort of two hypotheses, and you articulated them well. One is that you're kind of used to it, and so you kind of don't respond. The other is that you're hypersensitive to even instances that really shouldn't be interpreted as ostracism, that you see it when it's not there. The research that is a little bit mixed on that right now. So I would say that maybe both are possible, but in things that I've been involved in, they seem to be hypersensitive, but there are cases where people just become non-sensitive, almost numb to things. And maybe that's a different stage. Maybe that's a different, maybe numbness is like the worst of it all, when you just sort of give up so much that you don't even notice anything. And that's why we're seeing some differences there. But I think that a lot of the research we're seeing right now suggests that they're kind of hypersensitive. They notice it even if it's not happening. Yes? Hi. Can you? Oh, it's broken? Okay.
So I wondered if it made any difference to the effects of ostracism if people knew it was because of the group they belong to. Like, let's say you know you're being ostracized because you're a woman or a Jew or Muslim or
Right.
African American.
So we've done some research on this. We've had, this is a the question was, does it matter if you kind of know why you're being ostracized because it's some group membership that you have? You're a woman amongst men who are ignoring and excluding you. You're a Muslim among Christians and you're being excluded. Does that make a difference? And the answer to that is yes, it does. We did research with African Americans and Caucasian Americans where you were the only African American ostracized by a white Caucasian Americans in all various combinations. And first of all, it bothers everybody to be ostracized regardless, but it takes longer to recover when you think that it's because they are ostracizing you for some permanent group characteristic that you possess. So your recovery is retarded from that experience. So if it's something you can't shed and that you carry with you, probably you think this is happening now, this has always happened, this is going to happen in the future, and it's just harder to get over. If it's a temporary thing, like we say, you're a blue person and here's two red people, you know why it's been, you give that reason for it, oh, I was blue, they were red, and you get over it quickly. So if it's a temporary kind of thing, it's easy to shed, but if it's a permanent characteristic like gender or ethnicity or something like that, then it actually takes longer to recover from, at least from our research that we've done so far. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I was struck by your comment about your Confederates and how they behaved after ostracizing over time, and I was wondering how much work has been done on the effects of being an ostracizer.
There's been some. It's more recent research on like what types of people are likely to ostracize. What do they get from doing it? So it's a lot. It's sort of fresh research that we don't have an accumulated set of data to kind of summarize. Some research shows that by doing it, you feel a sense of a power, more so than if you argue with somebody. That you feel more bonded with another person that's doing it with you, more so than if you're both arguing with that person. And so that they're sort of like the need threats or need fortifications for the users. Now, of course, if you're induced to ostracize when you don't want to, you don't get those benefits. So if you're simply told to do it, or the defensive type of ostracism we were talking about, then you don't get those benefits. Did I cover what you asked, or was there something more to it?
No, I think that was mostly it. I was, again, also thinking about politics and thinking being instructed to ostracize groups of people and what the kind of long-term social consequences could be.
Boycotting is a form of ostracism. It's something that sometimes can have an effect, especially if there's an economic basis for the decision. It is a form of ignoring and excluding. I'm faced with this all the time. I mean, I'm not quite sure at what point I want to cut somebody off. Sometimes even I do when I'm very mindful of my research. And so, but I think the first approach best is to interact and to engage and to try to find some common ground. So if you have a protesting group on campus, I think it's worthwhile to acknowledge their existence and to meet with them even if you don't agree, as a hypothetical. Yes. Yes.
So I'm really interested in how people's standards shift across time or over extended time. For people who have been chronically excluded, can you speculate on the impact of suddenly being included, or maybe even just chronically ignored? And I'm almost thinking here of Nicholas Epley's work, where he went on the subway where the norm is not to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And then he would reach out to someone and say, hey, how are you doing?
And there was just a surprising amount of interaction.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
So just a little bit, can you comment on how it goes against, what happens when people go against expectations?
Well, if you over-include people, which does go against expectations, if you ask people what they expect in cyberball, they expect equality. So if you are playing with 4 people and they throw the ball to you all the time and you throw it to them and they throw it to you, they never throw it to each other, that violates expectations and you like it. Okay, so it's not just the violation of expectation that's driving this effect. And in other studies we do, we kind of, in various ways, make it clear to them why or that they will be ostracized. It still bothers them. And so expectations, I don't think, drive the effect, but I do think that your point is well taken, that people are more open to inclusion than we expect them to be, and they sort of like it more. I mean, the flip side of looking at somebody through air study is that all you have to do is look at somebody for a moment. I don't mean stare at them or stalk them. That's not good. But just, I see you. You're there. I acknowledge your existence. That made them feel more socially connected on campus. That brief thing. So it's just amazing how responsive we are to signs of inclusion. Yeah. So I'd like to thank you all for your excellent questions, and if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask that you weren't able to, that's my email address, so feel free to contact me. Thank you.